Douglas Tilden was a very famous sculptor in California from 1860 to 1935. He's often called the father of San Francisco's sculptures for the large number of commissions that have been installed in San Francisco. At the age of 4 years old, he developed scarlet fever and became deaf. Thereafter, he went to the California School for the Deaf. And in his extra time, used clay to sculpt. He's become an icon in deaf history for his sculptures prior to his death in 1935 of a heart attack. Douglas Tilden also had very famous and honorable mentions in Paris and around the world for his sculptures.
Of the tired boxer.
One of which was called the Tired Boxer. So as I mentioned, he became deaf at the age of 4 from scarlet fever. His parents wanted him to continue to pursue his education, and so 2 years later he was enrolled at the California School for the Deaf, which at the time was located in Berkeley, and now is located here in Fremont. He graduated in 1889 with honors and received a teaching position at the school. He taught 8-year-olds. He continued to teach for 8 years. And throughout his 8 years of teaching, he continued to sculpt using clay primarily. Staff members started to notice his skills. And so they developed a fund to allow him to go to New York and study under more well-known sculptors. Once they raised enough, he went to New York for 8 weeks for the Academy of Design, after which he went to Paris and furthered his studies. He studied under a sculptor named Paul Francois Chopin, who was another deaf sculptor at the time. He was very successful in Paris. And in 1890, he got a grant called the Durham Fund, and it was administered by CSD, the California School for the Deaf. He left Paris with a love of sculpture and much more knowledge than he had when he went there. Not only did he learn quite a bit while he went there, he also won awards and design contests in Paris. And he had sculptures installed all over the world. he traveled back to California School for the Deaf to continue his work. In 1924, his wife, Elizabeth Cole, decided that she wanted a divorce. He had left the California School for the Deaf to become a full-time sculptor, but his fellow staff members were upset at this because they felt he had deserved, or he rather needed to stay there because of the grants that they had developed for him. So they gave him a choice of either continuing to teach or paying back the money that he was granted. He had been under the impression that this was a gift, a grant, and not something that he would need to pay back. And so the School for the Deaf decided to commandeer his sculpture called the Bear Hunt as recompense for the funds that they had given him. After his divorce, Douglas Tilden had a very hard time finding work. So he attempted to get another job at the California School for the Deaf, but at this time they had stopped recruiting deaf professionals. And so he moved to Hollywood to sculpt and earn money, primarily from sculpting dinosaurs and other extinct animals. By 1930, he had developed a small studio with the amount of work that he had, but that work dried up. And so he moved back to Berkeley, and in 1934, passed away from a heart attack. And yet, he's become an icon in the deaf community for the plethora of work that he's developed. Again, in San Francisco, he became known as the father of sculptors.
During that glorious age.
During that glorious age. And yet tourists nowadays in San Francisco don't know the value of those sculptures and the history and recognition that he developed. Passing by to get hot dogs and visit other tourist attractions, most people don't know that history. In closing, Douglas Tilden graduated from honors at the California School for the Deaf. He taught for 8 years and was one of the first in 1935 to be recognized worldwide for his sculptures. San Francisco, Berkeley, and the wider Bay Area all have installments, among many other places. From the Durham Fund and his travels, he followed his dreams, traveled around the world, including to New York and Paris, to do what he loved.